It's May 13th, 2019, and it's time to review 5 of the most outrageous, infuriating, or just plain baffling things that have happened lately. It's your Facepalm 5. Let's count them up. Number 1, Trump administration digs in its heels against Congress. While Democratic leadership still insists impeachment isn't the way to go, the Trump administration has been taking steps these last couple of weeks to fortify itself against the Democrats in Congress who do have enough spine to try to hold it accountable for its crimes and corruption. Attorney General Bill Barr testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee week before last. The committee is controlled by Republicans, but the Democratic members managed to get their shots in, particularly Mazie Hirono, who accused Barr of misleading the public and called for his resignation, and Kamala Harris, who reduced Barr to a sputtering series of excuses and evasions by asking a few simple, direct questions, like, did you examine the evidence behind the Mueller report before deciding not to charge the president? To which Barr answered, no. And, did the president ever ask you to investigate anyone? To which Barr answered, There was also a truly remarkable exchange between Barr and Dick Blumenthal at that hearing, where Blumenthal asked if the committee could see notes that were taken by Barr's staff recording a phone call between Barr and Robert Mueller following Barr's misleading statements ahead of the release of the Mueller report. No, Barr said matter-of-factly. When Blumenthal asked why he wouldn't turn over the notes to the committee, Barr responded, why should you have them? I don't know, to see if you're lying? Blumenthal didn't say that, but I wish he had. Anyway, after the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing, Trump decided he wasn't going to play with these mean Democrats anymore. Barr ignored a subpoena to testify before the Democrat-controlled House Judiciary Committee, which subsequently voted to hold him in contempt. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin refused to turn over Trump's tax returns to the House Ways and Means Committee, and Trump asserted executive privilege over the Mueller report. That last move is designed to keep Congress from examining the unredacted report and its underlying evidence, a report which, according to Trump, is the product of a witch hunt and hoax conducted by angry Democrats and is therefore not to be trusted, but which also totally exonerates him of any wrongdoing. That chain of reasoning has a few gaps in it, huh? These standoffs between the White House and Congress are likely to wind up in court, perhaps eventually finding their ways before the U.S. Supreme Court, where Trump presumably hopes the right-leaning justices, including 2 he appointed himself, will side with him. Take it to the Supreme Court and hope our buddies there have our backs is becoming a common Republican strategy. It plays into the next story as well. Number 2. Georgia one-ups Ohio by enacting even worse anti-abortion law. About a month ago, I told you about the so-called heartbeat bill enacted in Ohio, which bans abortions after a fetal heartbeat is detectable, which often occurs before a person even knows they're pregnant. Ohio's law is bad enough, but legislators in Georgia apparently took it as a challenge to come up with something even more draconian in their state. Sadly, they succeeded. Last week, Georgia Governor Brian Kemp signed into law a version of the heartbeat bill that not only bans abortion in similar fashion to the Ohio law, it also imposes serious criminal penalties on those who terminate their pregnancies. The law recognizes a fetus as a person with all the applicable legal rights and protections. That means that someone who terminates their pregnancy could conceivably be prosecuted for murder, a crime which carries a penalty of life imprisonment or death in the state of Georgia. That's not all. People who travel out of state to obtain legal abortions could be prosecuted in Georgia for conspiracy to commit murder. Medical professionals who perform abortions could also be prosecuted for murder, and someone who miscarries could be prosecuted for second-degree murder if their conduct is found to have caused the miscarriage. All of this is obviously unconstitutional, in flagrant violation of the Roe v. Wade decision, which established that people have the right to terminate their pregnancies. But of course, that's the point. The Republicans who pass and enact these laws know they'll be taken to court. The whole idea is to provoke a court challenge, appeal all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, and hope the conservative majority rules to overturn Roe v. Wade. It's a solid, if ruthless and morally repugnant strategy. Ultimately, the only way to stop things like this from happening is to stop electing anti-abortion extremists, also known as Republicans, to public office at all levels of government. But that would mean more Americans would have to stop voting for candidates who pander to their irrational fears and prejudices, which is why it's such a solid strategy. Number 3, former priest accused of sexual misconduct allowed to keep job as middle school teacher. Last month, an arbitrator ruled that Joseph Deshawn, a teacher at Cinnaminson Middle School in Burlington County, New Jersey, could keep his job after being accused of making inappropriate comments to a 12-year-old girl who is a student at the school. The Cinnaminson Board of Education moved to dismiss Deshawn after he allegedly said to the girl, "Look at me. Let me see your pretty green eyes," in what is described as a creepy voice. The motion to dismiss Deshawn also cited his past conduct, and by past conduct, I mean he's a former priest who began a sexual relationship with a teenage girl when he was 28 and she was 14, and had a child with that same girl 2 years later when she was 16. According to the New York Post, Deshawn's name is on a list of priests who were credibly accused of sexual abuse, but he was never prosecuted, and he left the priesthood voluntarily, 4 years after his child with the teenage girl was born. The school district apparently didn't know about any of this until 2002. Deshawn was suspended for 3 weeks, but was then allowed to return to work and faced no further discipline. That was a bad decision then, and it's an especially bad decision now, because the arbitrator cited that 2002 decision in his ruling that the Board of Education couldn't get rid of Deshawn this time. The arbitrator wasn't persuaded of the seriousness of the alleged creepy remarks about the 12-year-old girl's eyes, because I guess that's the sort of thing a teacher should be allowed to say to a student, and said the board couldn't fire him for the other stuff because they found out about it 17 years ago and were okay with it up to now. It would be nice if we could all agree that a child's right to feel safe at their school is more important than a predator's right to have a given job, but hey, at least the Board of Education tried to shit-can the guy. Even if they had succeeded, it would have been too little too late. But then again, that's how we usually deal with cases like this. To wit, number 4. Pope takes further ineffective action against church sex abuse. Last week, Pope Francis issued new rules requiring all Catholic dioceses to establish systems to report sexual abuse to church authorities. Okay. Good, I guess. Mostly this story just reminds me that, despite clergy sex abuse being pervasive in the Catholic Church for centuries, this wasn't a rule before. And what kind of a system needs to be established to report sex crimes committed by priests? I've got a system. Call the cops! Granted, civil authorities don't have a great record when it comes to investigating and prosecuting sex crimes either, but they're better than the Catholic Church. Better at responding to sex abuse than the Catholic Church. Is that the ultimate example of damning with faint praise or what? Anyway, these new rules address how allegations of sexual abuse are to be handled by the Church internally. The Vatican is still insisting that it can manage this in-house. But why is that even an option? This is like finding out that sexual assault has been rampant at Walmart for decades, only for the CEO to send out a memo to all employees saying, "Remember, if you see a stock clerk raping someone in the back, be sure to tell your supervisor." Is that handling the problem? No, it is not. It's not even in the same universe as handling the problem. Handling the problem happens in a whole different plane of existence. Despite these belated and incremental reforms, the fact that the Catholic Church is still insisting that it has the right to respond to sexual abuse committed by members of its clergy itself, without immediately involving civil authorities, shows that the Church hasn't really learned anything. The arrogance and the appeal to imaginary authority that allowed clergy sex abuse in the Catholic Church to go unaddressed for hundreds of years is still in place. No institution, religious or otherwise, should be above the law. Shame on us if we see these new rules as anything other than what they are, just the latest attempt by church leaders to protect abusers and escape their own accountability. Speaking of people who think they're above the law, Now it's time for the segment devoted to some of the other things Donald Trump has done recently to disgrace the presidency and embarrass and/or endanger the United States and the rest of the world. It's number 5, The Further Misadventures of Lord Dampnut. Please keep in mind, as always, the following is not a complete list. He sued to block 2 congressional committees from obtaining his financial records. Then, when the New York Times ran a story reporting on 10 years of Trump's tax information it had obtained, which showed he had largely avoided paying taxes and lost over $1 billion during the 10-year span examined by the Times, Trump responded by tweeting, essentially, "I meant to do that." He said the losses the Times discovered were the result of depreciation, that claiming losses to avoid paying taxes was just something real estate developers did back then, that it was sport. And also, the story is fake news anyway, so just forget all that stuff he just said about depreciation and tax write-offs, I guess. Again, his logic is not exactly sound. Besides, the Times story makes it clear that the losses were not due primarily to depreciation and other tax avoidance strategies, but to the fact that Trump's businesses were failing and he was an incompetent manager of his money. He issued a memo ordering changes to American policy regarding the granting of asylum, including requiring those who come to this country seeking asylum to pay a fee. Just like it says on the Statue of Liberty. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, payment due upon arrival, cash or credit, no personal checks. He spent part of a weekend retweeting a series of far-right extremists, including QAnon account Deep State Exposed, white supremacist blogger Lauren Southern, racist Fox News anchor Laura Ingraham, and conspiracy theorist Paul Joseph Watson, who was recently banned from Facebook. Trump also tweeted that he was continuing to monitor the censorship of American citizens on social media, because the free market is the highest authority until it results in people who Trump likes facing the consequences of their actions. Free speech means the president telling private social media companies what users and content they have to host. Again, with the logic, not so much. He also retweeted Jerry Falwell Jr., saying that Trump should have 2 years added to his term of office to make up for the Mueller investigation, or, as Falwell calls it, and Trump has called it too, a corrupt failed coup. But that's no big deal. Falwell was just joking, and Trump only retweeted him because he likes jokes. Like last week when he was at a rally in Panama City, Florida, talking about immigration, and he said, referring to people crossing the border with Mexico, "How do you stop these people?" And one of his supporters called out, "Shoot them!" Which Trump must have thought was a good joke, because he chuckled and said, "Only in the panhandle." Ha! Yeah. People who vote for me shout about shooting immigrants at the border. What a bunch of characters. Oh, we have fun. What else? He announced a new set of so-called religious protections for healthcare workers that essentially legalize discrimination as long as you can hang a religious motivation on it. He welcomed the World Series champion Boston Red Sox to the White House. You might have seen folks chuckling over the fact that the official White House website misspelled the team's name. Haha, they spelled it like clothes. But I'm much more interested in the fact that every person of color on the team except J.D. Martinez refused Trump's invitation, while every white player on the team accepted it. As Boston Herald columnist Steve Buckley observed, really, it was the White Sox who visited Trump. Something tells me Trump was okay with that. He probably didn't even notice. The Washington Post reported that the Trump administration pushed to remove references to climate change from a non-binding declaration of principles by the Arctic Council. And finally, after lying about the amount of disaster relief that has been provided to Puerto Rico following Hurricane Maria, Trump urged Republicans to vote against a disaster relief bill that included an additional $3 billion to Puerto Rico, along with billions more in federal aid designated to other regions of the country still recovering after tornadoes, floods, and wildfires. According to the Washington Post, Trump's opposition to the disaster relief bill was mostly about the additional aid to Puerto Rico. Now, why would he be okay spending money to help out people affected by natural disasters in the South, Midwest, and West, but not Puerto Rico? Gosh, I can't figure it out. Do you think it has something to do with why the black and brown players on the Red Sox refused to meet with him? As Trump himself might say, nobody knows. Which means everybody knows. because it couldn't be more obvious. That's 5. Speak out, act out, resist, look after each other. Hey folks, hope you got something out of this one. If you did, please click like, share the video, and subscribe to this channel if you're not subbed already. And also, please consider helping me to keep making videos like this one and like all the videos I make by becoming a supporter of this channel with a monthly donation through Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/Steve Shives to become a patron for as little as $1 a month, and those $1 a month pledges really add up and help me out like you would not believe. But if you can afford it, and you think I'm worth it, you can pledge more than $1 a month, and if you pledge $5 a month or more, you get yourself a shout-out at the end of the Facepalm 5, just like these folks, my newest $5 or more per month patrons. And they are Lord Byron Keith, thank you, Lord Byron. Alan Robichaud, thank you, Alan. Jordan Harpole, thank you, Jordan. Frank Quinn, thank you, Frank. Andrew Moreau, thank you, Andrew. Steve H, thank you, Steve. KZL, thank you, KZL. And Leslie Coy, thank you, Leslie. Thanks to all of you who are patrons of my channel at whatever level you're pledging and however long you have been a supporter. I appreciate all of you. Thanks to all of you for watching, whether you are a Patreon supporter or not. Maybe you just watch the videos and share, and that's fine too. I appreciate all the support in whatever form it takes. I thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.